Hello, tiny people. Here we go. Let's review the Constitution, at least some of the broad elements of it. You still need to dive into the booklet that you have, go over some of the details. This isn't going to cover everything. It's just a quick overview before tomorrow's quiz. Pardon me, tis. The Americans didn't want to have a strong central government as they'd had under Britain, and they certainly didn't want anarchy. They had to come up with something. First was the Articles of Confederation government, but that proved to be too weak. So they needed to find some other way of having an effective government. They chose a representative government, and that's where groups of people elect one person to speak for them and to watch over their interests. There are about 340 million Americans. We can't have a democracy. This is not a democracy, never meant to be, never will be, because that would require all 340 million of us to vote on everything. We have a representative republic. We have a written constitution that sets down the basic framework of government. The representatives debate and make the laws. Remember, there's two sides of a thing can look so different. And so there were some people that opposed the Constitution when it came out. Some people thought it was the best thing. Again, the character of George Washington was one of the big ways, or one of the big forces behind people accepting the Constitution. It was written, and again, it's a framework of government. It's not all the details. Those would come later in federal laws and treaties and such. What the Constitution does is just set up what the government will be. It separates powers between three branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The executive branch enforces laws, the judicial branch interprets laws, so they had to start with the legislative branch because before either of the other two can do their job, there must be some laws. It's the legislative branch that makes the laws. That's made up of the Congress, which has two branches or two houses. It's a bicameral. That means two-house legislature, the House of Representatives and the Senate. There were separate powers between the branches. Remember, the executive enforces the laws. That's the president, and he does have help. A number of different cabinet positions, different areas of government, also right on down to the force of the federal marshals and the FBI and the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and the Coast Guard. The judicial branch, that interprets the laws, like somebody interpreting a language that's hard to understand. Well, laws are written by lawyers and such, and so they're written in a very detailed way and have specific meanings. It's up to the Supreme Court to show what was the spirit of law, what was the law intended to do when dealing with actual cases. This balance of power things, there had to be a way to keep one side from becoming too powerful. We've all had teeter-totter horror stories, right? So just think about that. If there's no check on the other person on the other end of the teeter-totter, you got a problem. Checks on powers, you'll see here that each branch has checks on each of the other two branches. There's a veto, for example, the executive, the president, has a check on the legislature. If Congress passes a bad law, the president can veto it. The judicial review, that allows the Supreme Court to look at legislation and if it's deemed unconstitutional, to get rid of it. Impeachment, the legislature can get rid of someone in the executive department, including the president, if they are guilty of a crime that rises to the level that the people feel, the people's representatives, the House of Representatives, feels warrants removal from office. The president, remember, is elected by the Electoral College, not directly by the people. It's the states, their representatives, their electors that elect the president. The reason we have this is because it gives the smaller states at least some say in electing a president. If there was no electoral college, then it would simply be California, Texas, Ohio, Florida, New York. They'd elect the president, and the rest of us would just be out of luck. They would have enough electoral votes. There are enough people that live there. But this way, there would be enough popular votes. But this way, with an electoral college, even a very limited population state like Montana still has a small vote, but at least some say in choosing a president. When we started reading the Constitution, the preamble, remember, American government is based on the idea of natural rights. That is, God gave to each human being certain rights: life, liberty, and property. People can give up some of those rights in exchange for the protection of government. And that's the basis of our government. We, the people, the start of the Constitution shows that we believe that it is the people who have given the government the power to govern. And they start off saying it's to create a more perfect union. The United States already had the Articles of Confederation, but that was not a perfect union. It was a very imperfect union. It didn't work well, too weak. And remember, we had the vocabulary word framers. Those were the people who were actually in the room in Philadelphia and wrote the United States Constitution. Article 1 deals with the legislative branch, that is Congress. The House of Representatives, to be a representative, a person must be at least 25 years old. They wanted them to have a little bit of life experience and been 7 years a citizen of the United States. That's so they would come to know, if they had come from a different place, they would come to know what it's like and what the United States is all about. And that person must remain an inhabitant of the state from where he was elected during his entire term in office. The term is only 2 years because revenue bills for taxes start in the House of Representatives, and it was critically important in the eyes of the framers that those people be directly responsible, those representatives be directly responsible to the people who elected them. So they have to come up for election every 2 years, and if they've raised taxes too high and not done a good job with budgeting, they can be removed from office by the voters. The number of representatives each state has is based on the state's population. And they do elect a Speaker of the House. That's the officer who presides over the House and keeps things organized. The Senate, a person must be 30 years old and been 9 years a citizen of the United States and also an inhabitant of the state from which he was elected. Senators serve a 6-year term. There are 2 per state. They, in the beginning, represented the state. They were appointed by the state legislatures. And the president of the Senate is the vice president of the United States. But there are times when the vice president has other duties. Therefore, the senators elect a president pro tempore to run meetings and handle the business of the Senate when the president is, or when the vice president is away. Article 1 also talks about impeachment. And remember, impeachment is not removal from office, it's merely being charged with a crime. There have been 4 presidential impeachments in American history. None of the 4 resulted in a guilty verdict. The House of Representatives accuses the executive, and they act as the prosecutors. They present the case against. The Senate acts as the jury. They listen to the evidence, both for and against, and decide guilty or not guilty. And to keep things organized and to make sure there's a fair trial, the Chief Justice acts as the judge. It takes 2/3 of the senators voting guilty to convict. That's important because they didn't want this simply to become a political game where one party could remove a president elected from the other party. Upon being found guilty, the person is removed from office. That's the sum total of what happens with an impeachment. But that person is still an American citizen and is liable for any problems they have caused, any crimes they have committed in a regular court of law. Article 1 also talks about how a bill becomes law. The House and Senate agree on the same bill. It's sent to the president. If the president signs it, right away it becomes a law, or the president can forbid it. A Latin term, veto, means I forbid, and send it back to Congress. If 2/3 of the senators and 2/3 of the representatives both decide they still want this to be a law, then they override the veto, is the term, and it becomes a law. If the president chooses the third option and simply ignores the bill, after 10 days, it will become law. That might happen if a president doesn't want their name affixed to a law, but doesn't think their veto will hold. Take a little time out here and watch this YouTube video about how a bill becomes a law. Article 1, Congressional Powers. The General Welfare Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause, that's what makes government to have grown to the size it is now. General welfare means the Congress has decided whatever they say is for the good of most people, they can make a law about. And the Necessary and Proper Clause says they can make whatever laws they need to enforce their decision that something is for the general welfare. But look over the specifics in that long list of what congressional powers are. There are certain things that Congress is not allowed to do. Oh, nay, nay. Like interfere with the slave trade until 1808. They can't end habeas corpus. Remember, that's where a person arrested for a crime is told what crime they're being accused of. Congress is not allowed to make any ex post facto law, that is, a law that goes into effect before the law was passed, and no capitation, which is a direct tax on individuals. We do, of course, have an income tax now, which is a capitation. But the first time we had an income tax, it was thrown out as unconstitutional, and the Congress had to work to change the Constitution to allow for an income tax. Check your list of the powers forbidden to states. The executive branch, Article 2, we know that the president serves a 4-year term. He must be 35 years old, and he must be born an American citizen. Now, early on, there were others who hadn't been born Americans because the country was only 12 years old when they signed this Constitution. But it's been centuries since that was actually the case. So a person must be American born, must be an American citizen at the time of their birth to become president. Just for your own information, the two youngest presidents were Teddy Roosevelt, who became president when William McKinley was assassinated at age 42, and JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who became president at 43 when he was sworn in. He was the youngest person ever elected to the office. Again, look over the details. Article 3 talks about the judicial branch. They interpret the laws. This is the Supreme Court. And they're not supposed to decide what the judges want, what their political bend is, but merely say, what is the Constitution, the highest law of the land, telling us about laws? Article 4 gives rights and liabilities of states and citizens. Remember, they kept that idea of the Northwest Ordinance from the Articles of Confederation Government, the only good law passed under the Articles, and that says that they can create new states. Then there's a guarantee to states that they will have a Republican form of government. We won't allow a king of Kansas. Article 5 tells people how to amend the Constitution. An amendment is a change or an addition. Remember, in the whole history of the United States since the Constitution was adopted, there have only been 27 changes, and the first 10 of them, the Bill of Rights, they were made during the first Congress. So it's really difficult to change the Constitution. It takes 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and 3/4 of the state legislatures have to vote for a bill. There is another way which you can read about when you look at the Constitution about calling a convention. Article 6 says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. There is nothing higher. Article 7 says, well, when will this Constitution go into practice? That's ratification, official acceptance. And it says when 9 of the 13 states officially say, yes, we accept this, we will make this our government, then the articles will be out. And for those 9 states, the Constitution will be in, and they hope the others would join them shortly, which they did. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now you may work with each other to review. Please notice you can tab that booklet so you can find things more quickly. You have the period, but that's all you have. Also, make sure your notes are clear, legible, readable. You may not staple pages into your booklet. You may not have a notebook also. You may have the booklet, including the notes that are inside the booklet, and that, my friends, is all that you may have. Thank you.